Welcome to the AtoZrunning podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andi.
And I am Zach. And up next, your hosts discuss when runners should go all out with some bonus stories. And after that, World of Running updates about Euro Championships, historic Falmouth, and more. Glad to have you with us, and once again, glad to hear your thoughts and questions. And if you didn't know, you can submit questions to us anytime. Go to AtoZrunning.com/question, and at the end of every month, we share a highlight of some of those questions on our end of month Q&A episode. So head to AtoZrunning.com/question to share your situation and running questions with us, and we may feature them soon.
Speaking of which, we met one of our listeners who we had only interacted through the podcast and social media and whatnot. And it was great to meet them at Mitchell's Run Through Rockford. And he thanked us for answering his questions, but he apologized for getting the running content for free. And I was like, don't apologize. We want to be sharing with runners. Our mission is to help runners thrive. So you don't have to be sorry. That's why we do this podcast. It's free. And the reason why I'm sharing this is because I just want to say, please, subscribe for free. We'll keep putting good content out there. We're running nerds. Take advantage of that. And if you do love this show, we would love to grow and reach more runners. So please share.
And if you need to alleviate your guilty conscience, you can always give us money.
No, don't do that. That's awkward.
It's not hard to accomplish.
No, don't do that. So this is like our passion, and we really do love to help runners, and we do love to connect you with good information to help you run better, feel better, and learn more about this great sport of running.
Yes. And on that topic, as mentioned, those questions are especially pertinent and important because next week is our next Q&A episode. And just in case you have a question on your mind and you may want to slide into a feature spot for the episode, feel free to share it.
That'd be great. We'd love that.
AtoZrunning.com/question.
This week we have the hip hook again. I keep talking about it, and it's been amazing to help me release my tight iliacus and psoas muscles. And it's through a trigger release technique. So the hook, you stick it right by your hip, and you're able to release your psoas and your iliacus muscles. If you'd like a discount, use the code ATOZ, A to Z, at alethahealth.com. So you can do that if you hop on over there. If you don't remember all of that because you're running right now, you can go over to AtoZrunning.com and we'll link to it there as well. Now let's get on to our main topic. Today's topic is when to go all out.
When, not if.
No, we want to be able to go all out, but we want to do it at the proper times and in the proper ways as to not disrupt our training too much. So what it means to go all out, Zach likes to use the reference draining the well. What do you mean by that, Zach?
Go hard or go
Empty
home.
it out. Empty it all out. And it's relative to what's possible in any moment because, of course, that's not going to mean a pace. We want to disregard that as being a measurement for many things. But going all out is when you leave it all on the line. So that's as fast as you can go for the distance given.
Yeah. So draining the well is when you are empty. You have nothing left to give. And so in concept, the challenge here in trying to define this concept is, well, how do you know you've gone all out unless you blow up? Unless you literally run out and collapse and you're done.
Which happens.
Ideally, if that happened the moment you stepped across the finish line, then, that's great. No problem, right? Except for usually that's preluded by some other problems long before you're literally collapsing on the ground.
So what it doesn't mean is going fast. You want to go fast. In training, we go fast. We do a lot of neuromuscular work. We subscribe to that on the AtoZrunning podcast, but it doesn't mean that we're doing that fast effort all the way until we're completely spent. There's nothing left to give. Where we're collapsed, jello legs, vomiting, all those things. So
vomiting. Hey?
Do you all realize
This
what
is
it
an
means now? I'm
exciting
hoping.
topic.
I know it's a very
Well,
exciting
you probably
topic.
still are struggling if you're like me, because I'm still struggling as I'm trying to explain this to you, and how to explain the best way to know that I have gone all out without blowing up. So let's start with some anecdotes. Andi,
Sure.
you have stories to tell.
I have stories to tell, but
Tell
Zach was
stories.
like, "Tell these stories," and it is hard sometimes to really put your finger on it. And you can have the best races of your life without getting to this place that we're talking about, without having your well completely drained. Well, does that mean that maybe I could have gotten an extra half a second if I would have, gone all out in the last 100 of my race? Perhaps, but also it's not very consequential. So staying right behind going all out is definitely a better spot to be. And I felt like I was able to do that. I ran the 1K indoors in college, which is kind of an odd event.
1,000 meters.
1,000 meters. And for me, knowing that I was not quite as fast, just physically as fast as some of the other girls in the heat, I had to go early. So I had to, because I knew myself, I knew that I had to go early if I was going to put myself in a spot to contend for the position, the All-American position. And so I did that, and I did leave it all out there, knowing that I didn't have quite the next gear that some of the other ladies did. And I was able to get my goal, but I was going a lot earlier. In fact, I took the lead knowing that some of them were going to pass me.
Maybe I should talk about this story from
Sure.
the audience perspective.
Okay.
Because here we were, her college team, all sitting in the stands watching, and 10 steps into the race, Andi takes off into the lead at a dead sprint. Maybe not quite 10 steps into the race, but it felt that way watching. And here she goes, flying into the lead. And, of course, every one of us thinking in our minds, she's going too soon. She's going to blow up. No. So then, your mixed emotions here where you want to cheer for her to encourage her on, but you also want to, somehow tell her to stop.
Help fix the situation.
Stop, don't do that. But she was doing it on purpose all along.
I was, yeah.
Had us fooled. So... yes, in that instance, the maximum. So for Andi to drain the well in the 1,000 meter and for her competitors to drain the well didn't match in terms of exactly what it looked like in the race.
Right.
Because Andi could not drain the well suddenly in the last 200 meters to the degree that some of those other women could. So as a consequence, the decision there was you have to start running harder earlier in order to actually fully expend everything you have available. Now, that's an interesting way to help explain the concept. I like this.
Yeah. And, we're going to talk about this every week probably for the rest of time. But because I was able to be intuitive and know what my body had to give, I was able to drain the well at the proper time in order to not collapse before the finish line.
Okay. Well, contrast that
with Chicago.
Marathon. With the marathon.
Yeah. So even though Chicago, a lot of you guys have heard this because it is my best race, my best marathon so far. Chicago in 2019, I was probably not quite on the pulse of what was the amount of effort to give to drain the well very slowly in the marathon. And I came through half marathon faster than my half marathon PR.
Which is rarely ever a good idea.
No, but I felt like I felt really good, and so as these things happen, and I feel like the story could have been told by so many others that it has the exact same series of events, but I felt bad and I had to readjust, and I did, and you know what, my splits weren't that unsatisfactory, and at the end I was able to salvage the race really well, but I did feel like I gave everything in that race. So at the end, I'm not feeling like, oh yeah, I have so much more to give in this event. I felt very, very satisfied in the work that I did. But the second half, so it was I think it was like almost 21, 220 in that, or sorry, 120, and then I came back and I ran a 2:43 overall time. So the splits weren't drastic, but it definitely was too much too soon, and then I was able to readjust early enough to be able to get back on track, but I still felt horrible.
Because
it's probably more than you wanted
yes.
for the antidote, right?
Well, so an anecdote, is that, what are we antidoting?
Okay,
So-
go ahead. You can critique me
so
later.
in contrasting that with my recent marathon experience, where I similarly knew early on that I was going much too fast, expending too much energy. I knew it about half marathon, much like Andi did in that instance. However, my choice at that moment was to continue overextending myself, knowing it wouldn't last the whole time, but in that instance, hoping it would outlast the other guy to try to win the race. So I made the tactical choice of basically blowing up deliberately. There's an outside chance maybe I wouldn't, but it certainly was indicative early on that it wasn't likely to last. So in that sense, okay, so how do we know is kind of the key piece. How do we know that we're going all out? How do we know that we've done everything we have possible? And it has everything to do with this principle and concept of that we've drained all the energy available in that moment relative to that day and what we had to give. And so let's give a separate anecdote here very briefly. We were reporting on the World Championships and Jakob Ingebrigtsen losing the 1500. Well, losing, I mean, he was not first. So Jakob Ingebrigtsen
still on the podium, which most
losing
would
the
call
1500.
winning.
Right. And his comments after the race were about how he felt the reason that he did not have that finishing sprint that others had in the race, to the degree that he might have, was because he was expending too much energy earlier in the race when he was battling a little bit with Timothy Chariot from Kenya. And so his comments were, I used too much energy earlier on and knew it, but was doing what I could to try to salvage a situation. And then it didn't have quite as much later on. So that makes sense. That holds to reason with what we're describing here. You only have so much energy you can expend, and your goal is to expend all of it by the time you cross the finish line. But in his case, he expended too much so that he ran out of his ability to expend further across the line, right? So that maybe that doesn't make a lot of sense. But let's give two more quick anecdotes then.
Okay.
So one is when I was running steeplechase in college still, one of the strategies, actually I did this in cross country too, but one of the strategies for the national championship when I won it was intentionally, deliberately trying to overextend my competitors. So making them run harder than they probably should have earlier in the race, knowing that it was going to be the case for me as well. However, believing that I could run in such a way that I would save just enough so that I'd have a little extra later on if needed, right? So that was the strategy and the deliberate strategy. And my coach, in fact, Q, had over the course of a couple of years kind of suggested different ways that I could help condition and train myself to be able to handle things like that as a race strategy to try to beat competitors, because it's one that is very difficult to manage when you do it. And so we actually prepared and trained for it. So in that instance, we did the same thing and deliberately went out very hard from the very beginning of the race. And as a consequence, yes, made some people overextend themselves, but also put other people in the position where in order to catch, they had to extend themselves fully earlier than they might have otherwise. And so, like, let's say in a race, on a track, you want to wait until the last lap to really give everything that's left, right? Or maybe even later than that, the last 200. But if you're not close enough to the front of the race and you're trying to win that race, you have to start extending yourself earlier on. And so as a consequence, there's situations here where, so what does it mean to, I give as much as I can give before I cross the finish line, but when I'm giving that energy matters. And it matters the most the longer the races are.
Yeah, and I'd like to, I don't want to assume that everyone's a distance runner who listens to this podcast, but most likely, if you're listening to this podcast, you might dabble in distance races. And so when you hear Zach talk about this strategy for steeplechase, that is not recommended. That's not recommended in most instances. Well, in most instances,
It's not really recommended generally.
Because you need, like Zach was saying, that he needed to train specifically for that strategy. But imagine this. Let's imagine you have a well, right? I guess we are kind of bringing that up. If you have a certain amount of energy to give, Zach was alluding to this earlier, when's the best time to give it? And so if you only have a certain capacity, wouldn't it be a lot better psychologically and for momentum to be giving that at the end, seeing what's possible, draining the well at the end?
Well, and specifically enough in advance that, so like remember Andy's 1K example. See, these anecdotes really were quite valuable, Andy, to the topic. So in Andy's 1K example, she couldn't wait too long to try to drain the well in that instance because she would run out of real estate where she still had more energy to give but wasn't able to give it all before she crossed the line. So she had to start giving more energy earlier, right? So in that instance, we have to know how much energy is left. How much do I have that I can give right now? And how long do I have in the race to give it? And how much of it can I give over the course of that, right? So in a marathon, that's especially tricky. But in any distance race, it's not a clear-cut thing. We don't ever really truly know exactly how much energy we have left and exactly how much it's going to cost us to do certain things.
That's true.
Right? So then what we have to do is we have to, one, practice it a lot, get really good at doing so. But two, we also have to understand the nature of how energy systems expend energy, which is a key factor in all of this too. For instance, if you expend too much energy early on, not only are you using more energy and having to conserve later, but also your energy system generally doesn't switch back and forth very well between the things it's doing. And so if you overextend yourself, like if your system overheats or if you literally go into an anaerobic state as opposed to aerobic, it's not very easy to come back out of those kinds of things. And so it also functions in terms of like processing fuel. So if your system is too highly active, you're overextending yourself a bit early on, then it doesn't process internalizing any more fuel very well. And so like all of those things are considerations in the process of like, when do you do this and how do you go about doing that? And so I'll give another example then, and this is the more common and relatable example, which is in this instance, it was a cross country race, but that's not terribly relevant here. I'm running against a field of people that I am not at all under the impression that I'm going to like try to win this race. My goal was just to do as well as I could, which is basically what every runner does when they toe a start line. Do as well as I can today. So in that instance, the strategy generally proves itself to be the same strategy all the time, which is you stay reasonably comfortable and relaxed early on, trying to expend yourself efficiently, but in certainly in a conservative mindset, conservative state. So I know I'm under expending early on, and maybe that's the first half of the race. Maybe it's not exactly that, but it's something like that, right? And then over the course of the later stages of the race, you gradually continue to try to basically say, can I dial it up a little more? Do I have a little more energy to give right now? And if I don't, if I'm realizing my general state of fatigue is higher than I thought it would be, then I don't try to go any harder yet because I'm not at the end of the race yet. And I continue to play that game for the rest of the race where I'm waiting to find out, can I go a little more now or do I need to just keep saving it for the moment? And you get to a point eventually where it's like, I have to go now to get rid of everything I can before I cross the finish line. And maybe that's 10 steps in front of the finish line and I'm just basically trying not to crawl. Or maybe that's like 2 miles away in a marathon and I'm realizing I've got a little extra here and now I'm just going to pour it on. So whatever the case may be, that's the trick to all of this. And it's like, how do you drain the well completely? Which then brings us to the important question, which is, so if that's what we're defining as what it looks like to go all out, we're clearly using races as an example through and through at the moment. So how about the first step of the question, which is, well, when should you not be doing this kind of thing? The total drain of the well. Go ahead, Andy. If I can move oh, there it is.
So you really stress your system when you go all out. So you would like to do that sparingly when it's important.
Like every other day. And
exactly.
Every single workout, basically. Or maybe just every day, but just not too much. Right, Andy? Every time you run, you should go all out. Because go hard or go home.
No.
Like Nike says, just do it.
This is the biggest fallacy found in running and training. You do not want to go all out all the time. This is not going to help you train your systems to get faster and faster. In fact, it's going to keep you from growth and make you feel like crap.
What? Why?
So we're not telling you, I want to just differentiate right here. We're not telling you not to run fast. We're not telling you not to train well and to have days that aren't easy. That's not what we are saying. We're talking about draining the well completely. That means going until you cannot go anymore. Well, one of the reasons is your musculoskeletal system, because you find yourself in a very vulnerable space when you end up draining the well. That's when we're going to find some stress-related musculoskeletal conditions that come from that. Cardiovascularly, it's going to have a high toll on the body because it elevates our stress hormones, which brings us into the endocrine system. So we don't want to have this chronic state of fatigue or metabolic disorders because we are continuing to go to that very, very stressful place on our body. And then nervous system, fight or flight. This automatic nervous system reaction continues to trigger physical reactions. And then we have, this problem with an overactive nervous system. So there's a lot there that's very stressful on the body. So if you continue to do this over and over again, going all the way to the line, then you're going to end up having a lot of physical issues.
As it were, in all areas of study of which I am aware, yes, all, like not just running and stuff. It appears to be that when we are trying to grow, there is in fact a Goldilocks zone of struggle, of stress. And so within that Goldilocks zone, when you stress something to the degree that enters that zone, then that is optimal for making progress or growing. If we extend beyond that, that is suboptimal, meaning you don't grow as well, and it can in fact have negative consequences depending on the nature of the thing. So certainly I work in education as well, and that's something we're always talking about. Many educators, you will be familiar with the, who was it?
You'd be familiar.
Vygotsky.
Who is it? That's ironic.
I don't know who said it, but the zone of proximal development is the one that they always use that phrase. So whatever the case may be, in all these things, we want to find the Goldilocks zone area. And so as Barry McGee says it, in a far simpler way, and of course, much more digestible for all of us, train, don't strain. Because straining is counterproductive. Not only is it not productive, it's counterproductive to making our progress goals. And so then it raises the question of, should we ever be going all out in training? And my answer is unequivocally, never. Never.
Ultimatums.
That wasn't an ultimatum. That was just a superlative.
Never
sure. Go all out in training.
Oh, and I can tell you what happens when you do.
Oh, what is that?
When you go all out in training too often, you're always going to continually feel tired. And as I mentioned earlier, hormonally, I can't speak. Everyone has, a slightly different makeup of how much hormones affect them. But for me, it was a whole lot. And I had a period of struggle in college where I was feeling bad all the time. And I was going all out in every single workout, and I was racing quite a bit. And this was not because someone told me to go all out. I just didn't know that I wasn't supposed to go all out, and I did.
It's the false runner intuition.
It is. And I feel like we're probably speaking to many of you, and you're going to feel like we're talking to you directly. Sorry, not sorry, but...
What?
I think that when we hear this for the first time, that you're going too hard in training, it can make you feel defensive at first. Certainly it did for me. Well, I am that good. I am that fast. And the truth of the matter is, what we are doing here is trying to build our systems and get better. And so to be able to take a step away and realize it's okay not to win the workout, because that's not what matters. And I need to develop the system in the proper way, and also be thinking about my long-term needs and health, because if I keep going to that well, I'm going to be dry. And I'm going to be in a dry spell, so to speak, and not be able to improve and be very frustrated.
The comment I most commonly hear when I'm talking directly with a person about this topic is the response, well, what if I'm not going hard enough and I'm not getting better? And the first answer is, remember our Goldilocks zone of stress and struggle. If you exceed the Goldilocks zone, not only is it not productive, it's counterproductive. It sets you backwards in motion to a degree. It depends, of course, on a lot of circumstances, but it is counterproductive and it can be detrimental. If you underwhelm your system and you approach the Goldilocks zone but don't actually get into it, well, it's not counterproductive. You're not harming your system. It is still progressive because you're doing something. You're stressing the system to some degree, just not quite as much as you could to gain, growth and progress? And the answer, of course, there is that's way better to underdo it than to overdo it in all circumstances.
Except for the race.
That's not what we're talking about, though. We're talking about training.
Yeah.
So then that raises the question, because you're asking yourself right now, you're saying, well, how do I get ready to be able to do that in a race if I never train it? And of course, this is one fallacy in general with training, which is if I don't do it in practice, I won't be able to do it in races. And of course, there's a lot of things that you're going to do in races that you really don't do in practice, and that's okay. But that's not what we're talking about right now. Instead, in this particular instance, so should I never go all out at all except for, the one goal race? And the answer is yes, with exception. And the key factor here is the all-out mindset in a race is reserved for those instances where it matters whether I eke everything out of the performance possible. And in the instances where it doesn't, I simply do not do that. I approach it. I get close. That's great in races to practice exerting our system to the max, minus a little. To the max, minus a little.
Minus collapsing and...
Yes, and so that's the key. You see people running their workouts on the track and they're over a trash can vomiting afterwards, and you think to yourself right away, that's not right. You're not doing the thing you need to be doing. You see someone after races doing that, and it's like, okay, if that was the race where it's like all was on the line, this is my performance test and everything I can put into it, and this is my season goal, all that kind of stuff, then go for it. Do whatever you can.
Vomit in that trash can. Be proud of that.
Absolutely.
Vomit.
But don't do that too often. even if you can say to yourself, they're all important races. They shouldn't be. They should not all be important races unless they're, you're doing one every 6 months.
And you can run PRs without getting to that place. And I think...
Oh, but Andy, you just did it again. So now if someone says, well, if I ran a PR and I wasn't going all out, shouldn't I have gone all out because I could have gotten an even better PR? Well, that's simply part of the consequence we pay for, being wise and doing things effectively, because of course it's true. And I do not begrudge anyone who feels this way. Let's say you're just having the day and this is not your goal race. You're only halfway through the season. You've got a lot of work yet to do, but it's clearly things are just clicking along really well and you're running a PR time. Do you then change your mindset and drain the well in that race? Because as we all know, you might not have tomorrow. You might get hurt. You might get sick. You might suddenly have change of plans and have to not travel to that big race 2 months later. So in that instance, I will never tell someone, I can't believe you did that. You just ruined your whole season. I won't do that. And in many instances, I may well make the same choice myself.
Right.
Because we also, as runners, have to take advantage of the opportunities that are given to us. And I understand that. Mm-hmm. But we certainly don't intentionally or deliberately go all out too often.
Mm-hmm. And this is another key piece that I want to bring up. Many of us don't know what it's like to go all out, or we think we've gone all out, but there's actually more to explore. And so being uncomfortable doesn't mean that you are draining the well completely. There might be a lot left of untapped potential. So as you're hearing us discuss this, I would challenge you to think it through and to evaluate whether if you're uncomfortable, if that's what is making you feel like you need to back off, or if you have really been entering that dry place too often. So I think it's a good time to have some reflection.
It is. This is really important. I asked Barry recently in an exchange about this very topic, and specifically about like racing and being uncomfortable and some of this other kind of stuff. And one of his comments that was really quite interesting to me was his point was because I was asking him about like training for that sensation of like just giving everything you can give in the final stages of a race, and like how do you be ready for that, what kinds of things do you do in training. And he had two comments in response. The first was the performance side of it, like how do I make sure I'm capable of finding another gear, as they call it, or of turning it up another notch. And his point was that has everything to do with how fit you are, with how extended your systems are. And so the training is going to accomplish that. That's not something that you necessarily you don't practice doing that in like the sense of like going all out and then draining the well in a final kick. You don't really practice doing that necessarily to be faster or get stronger, because that faster or stronger is happening because of the training that you're doing. And so in that case, there's a whole caveat here, which we're not going to go into at the moment. But how do we make sure that we're training our system to be fast to, all that kind of stuff. So his second layer though of the comment was, you're not really you're not being productive anymore when you have overextended yourself so much that it's hurting so badly. And so in that instance, like you want to kind of stay just behind that line when you're exerting yourself, even in the final stages of a race. And you can see this. It's a fascinating. I want to study this further. Watch all these championship races. And the people who are winning the races almost never, it does happen, but almost never are like in total misery. Like they have almost the semi-state of euphoria where they just look super strong and fluid. And it's like they are literally draining everything they've got, and yet they look like they just started or something like that. And then you start talking to these runners after the race, and a lot of times they start talking about like they broke a world record or they just won a gold medal, and it's like, oh, it felt great. You know, it felt awesome. I was out there clicking along. And it's like, well, how's that possible? You just ran faster than anyone's ever run before. Shouldn't that have been miserable? And there's something to Andy's earlier comment that, in fact, you can feel good and still perform better than ever before. There's like this little line, and once you cross it, it's not so good. So how can you stay behind that? Now, I'm not going to say definitively that that's the way we should all do everything, because I haven't fully explored that concept further. But yes, there's a degree of discomfort when you're going all out, no matter what, because you are trying to drain the well totally to empty. Yeah. So that brings up then the kind of the final comments about like, so when should you do this and what does it look like? Hopefully we've kind of painted that picture, crafted that story. So we've built the well for you. So now you can drain it. But just in case, if as summary, perhaps then, so certainly what it looks like fundamentally is that we give everything we can possibly give by the time we cross the finish line. What that looks like practically is that we're waiting until the last possible moment to say, at this time, I have enough, or I have enough space that I can give everything without giving too much. And so whatever that may mean, that is not something we know intuitively. We have to practice that so that eventually it becomes intuitive, but we have to practice that, and we have to practice it in savvy ways, because we don't want you going all out very often. So it's one of those things that's like developed over time, and it's developed in, you know, if I'm a runner who's been at this for a few years, chances are I'm really bad at this, and I'm going to have a lot of experiences where I end up blowing up early in races, or I finish the race and I think I had so much left to give, and that's okay because it's going to happen. But now that you know how to go all out effectively, you'll be able to practice it better.
Absolutely. And we hope that many of you can have great success in your racing and enjoy the process of training without draining the well and hindering your adaptations. So if that is our one big takeaway here, there is a time to go all out. And it's a really fun time, and it's a time of exploration and excitement, but those are reserved as race day only kinds of efforts. And we can still run hard in training. That doesn't mean we're not running hard. It just means that we're not draining the well.
Means that we train, we don't strain, as Barry McGee says.
I love it. Now on to the world of running.
Before we get into our World of Running updates, a quick note about A to Z runners racing recently. Say that 3 times fast. Andrea ran a trail 50K, which is just an incredible feat.
Yeah,
and
she showed us some pictures.
Grueling event to do as well. This is not any normal trail.
No, but it had some beautiful visual rewards.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Indeed it did.
Gorgeous. So congrats, Andrea. That's a huge accomplishment.
Nicely done. Now back onto the roads, and we'll enjoy it quite a bit. And we had a lot of 5K runners over the weekend. Zach, 2nd overall. Nicely done.
Mitchell's run through Rockford.
Close to the win there. Jacob with a PR, and then Andrew, 4th in age group. Stephanie, Erica racing as well, and great performances.
Yeah.
Everyone just having a good day.
Stephanie was 3rd in age group too. Erica's, running fast after surgeries. It's awesome. So really
good
fun
stuff.
to see.
Well done, everyone.
Well done. European Championships. It seems like they're running a lot. I feel like the Europeans are running a lot because we just had Commonwealth Games.
They are, in fact.
The women's 800, Keely Hodgkinson finally got her gold. She has been just going after it and really looking good, but has not claimed gold. She was runner-up to a thing, Mo, at the World Championships, as many of you guys know, and then she was runner-up to Mary Mora at the Commonwealth Games, and so she was hungry for it.
And runner-up to a thing, Mo, at the Olympics last summer.
Exactly. Hodgkinson said she refused to walk away today, which was, when it happened, without gold. So it's
great to say after you win it. Of course, if she didn't win
she said she was very happy, obviously, to finally get that gold. And she took a different approach to her usual run, and she hung back. She usually likes to be in the mix in the front. So she hung in the back and then ended up charging and claimed her gold.
Indeed.
In the women's 3,000 meter steeplechase, previous guest Alicia Konechek was fourth in a personal best time of 9:25. So congratulations to Alicia. And then Luisa Gega of Albania, she ended up winning in a championship record time of 9:11.31, which was held for 12 years before that. So she beat it by 6 seconds. So very impressive. She took a different approach. She led early, and she did not relinquish that lead the entire time.
That's a hard way to do it.
It is a hard way to do
Although
it. But
we
again,
have said,
steeplechase.
Again, yes. Although we have said in the steeplechase, you like to be out front because
Stay out of
you're
trouble.
not tripping on barriers.
Exactly.
And people.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, a lot of champions tend to run it that way. That's good. All right, well, let's talk about the men's side of some distance runs. In the 1,500 and the 5,000. Well, I guess we're not really talking about the men, just one man. In the 1,500 and the 5,000.
There was one man
to
rule them all.
Did it again, won the double. And in particular, just very strong performances.
Yeah.
It kind of looked like he was back in like that element that he's been in the past, where it's like not under any real stress, just kind of.
So he might be peaking.
Yeah, and so we know like he had some issues. Was a little bit rough around the edges early in the season, and that was known. But at the same time, Jakob Ingebrigtsen rough around the edges is still world class, and so that's not an excuse. But the point here being, this is particularly interesting for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
First, in terms of the 1,500 by itself, in the last, how many times? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. In the last 5 showings of the European Championships, the winner of the 1,500 was an Ingebrigtsen. Either
of one
Jakob
family.
or his older brother, Philip, or their older brother, Henrik. So between the three of them, since 2012, only one other person has won the 1,500 meter at the European Championships. I love it. That is just crazy. What a dynasty.
Wear the family crown.
What a dynasty.
It would seem, for sure.
It's really quite something. Yeah, and so, but that just kind of starts it because Jakob Ingebrigtsen himself has done that double before. And so winning the 1,500, 5,000 meter, this is his second time doing so.
That's impressive.
And the first time in 2018, which was the last World Championship or European Championships, because they skipped the COVID year.
Oh.
And he was 17 years old when he did it the first time, which we should then note.
Baby Ingebrigtsen.
At this point, he's only 21 years old.
Still a baby.
It must be stated, he currently represents what may well be the greatest 1,500 meter 5,000 combination threat since Hikam El Garouche of Morocco. Very clearly.
El Garouche is legendary.
Well, in fact, he is. So that was impressive.
Wow.
Very, very impressive for Jakob. In the women's 5,000, a very exciting.
Constance Klofferhoffen, also known as Coco, she took home soil victory. So they were in Germany for this. Very exciting for her. And a dominating a final 800 meter kick. So she just... I mean, it was an incredible thing to watch because everyone was talking about Eilish McColgan and Yasmin Khan. So it was really kind of cool to see her end up pulling that victory because she was the underdog in this situation. And she had a really bad bout with COVID and just hasn't been at the top of her game most recently.
And finished 4th in the 10,000 earlier in the championships. So it's like just missed the medal. And then all the same women basically were in this race. And so it was like a repeat.
And it's her first European gold.
First
Happy
Euro
to see
gold.
it for her. But it was a very strong race altogether. And so, yeah, it just
Yeah.
a fun race to watch. And I do have that event that I'll be linking to if you're itching to watch more track and field.
Who isn't?
Who isn't?
Speaking of more track and field,
Yeah.
there's another championship then for those not on the European side of the Atlantic in the Knack Championships, which stands for North America, Central America, Canada. Caribbean, thank you. Well, Canada's in there too because they're in North America.
They're in North America,
Yes,
so we've
thank
got
you.
that covered.
So yeah, it's basically the Americas minus South America. For some reason, this is there's a Pan Am
why
Games
not?
that
Okay.
includes South America too. So this is
Good.
just
Well,
there's
I'm glad we
lots of
include
different
them sometime.
championships.
Yep. So the story here is that the USA dominated the distance events. Dominated. Ajay Wilson edged out Allie Wilson, also of the U.S., in the 800, so they went 1-2. And then we had a U.S. women's sweep in the 5,000, led by Natasha Rogers, previous podcast guest, 15:11. Stephanie Bruce won gold in the 10,000 in 33:12, with U.S. teammate right behind her, Emily LePerry. She came in second. And then there was another U.S. sweep of the 3,000-meter steeplechase, led by Gabrielle Jennings. Sean McGordy and Dylan Maggard went 1-2 in the men's 10,000. Evan Jagger won the men's steeple. Duncan Hamlin in second. And then Eric Holt won and Josh Thompson in second for the men's 1,500 meter run. So I just laid it all out there for you. Lots of Team USA. Good stuff going. They truly did dominate the distance events. In the others, in the other events, it wasn't, Team USA all the way. But I was proud as a distance runner to see the USA really show up.
Yeah, and one of the things that's always interesting when you talk about what they call the minor international championships, there's the majors, which are Olympics and World Championships, and then there's the minors, which are like regional championships. And so a minor championship like this is a great opportunity for athletes who didn't make the world team, the Olympic team or something, to still represent the country, which is really cool. Plus, there's a different degree of competitiveness. So you give athletes a chance to potentially win races or place or medal in races who wouldn't necessarily do that at the international stage.
Well, and some of these
really
people, though, you heard names, Ajay Wilson and Natasha Rogers and, Eva Jagger, all these people were at
some of them, in
the
fact,
World
are.
Championships.
But
then
many were names you probably have never heard before, which is what I enjoy about these events.
It is really exciting. It's very fun to watch. And then Heather McLean won the women's 1,500. Jonah Koech won the men's 800. These are all from Team USA. And then Woody Kincaid won the men's 5,000 meters.
Very well done. Lots of fun
Well done.
things.
Yep.
Speaking of fun things, the Falmouth Road Race in Massachusetts is one of the historical road races. There's a kind of like a short list of the most historical road races in the United States, and this is one that tends to make that short list. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one. First, because it's a
beautiful.
7-mile race.
And it's also beautiful.
Well, okay.
It's like a boat town.
I wouldn't know anything about that, but I don't pay attention to race scenery when I'm running.
No?
I just
I
run.
do.
Okay. Yes, it is that as well. Now, let me give you some history here because it is, in fact, a historical race and it's kind of a cool history. So this reported by Kidius Mag. The event was, in fact, inspired in 1972 by Frank Shorter when he won the Olympic marathon. So here's how it goes. There's this bartender in Falmouth, name is Tommy Leonard, saw Frank Shorter win the marathon and thought to himself, what would it take to get that guy to run in our town? Wouldn't that be cool, right? So he puts together, or at least helps put together, this 7-mile random road race. And lo and behold, so the inaugural year was the next year, 1973. Only took 2 more years to get Frank Shorter to show up in 1975 and run their race.
Wow.
And yes, he won it. And, interestingly enough, beat a soon-to-be marathon legend, Bill Rogers.
Okay.
In the process. So it's kind of
How
like
did he get him to? Is there any more to
that?
that story?
I don't know. I got him.
What does it take?
Asked him.
Like if A to Z running,
Well,
put on a
listen,
race,
this is
could
the
we get some,
1970s when there's basically 3 famous runners in the country and they're national celebrities. And so they do these they tour for people.
Well,
they show up. And,
I think probably it's also a beautiful place, as I mentioned earlier.
I'm sure that's exactly why Frank Shorter ran there. Oh, Falmouth, that's beautiful. I'll run there. Well, let's talk about the results this year because it was, in fact, an interesting day in the Falmouth Road Race. On the women's side, very strong field.
Yeah, very strong field.
Yeah, headlined internationally by Edna Kiplagat from Kenya. The reason why I stumbled is because there are two Ednas in the race. Edna Kiplagat from Kenya, who has been one of the most dominant international distance runners in the last decade.
Winning marathon majors.
Marathon majors multiple times, like 3 of them. She's got multiple world championship marathon victories. She's won Falmouth in the past as well, so it's like coming back to a race she's already won before. So she's got quite the record. Well, she's facing off against one of USA's finest,
the sweet
Kira
America's
D'Amato.
sweetheart.
America's
Kira
sweetheart.
America's funny lady.
That is true.
So many things Kira D'Amato
fact,
is that I want to be.
Funny as she is, because after the race, one of her pictures in the finish line area was where she was giving bunny ears to the guy who won the race, which is, classic Kira D'Amato.
It is.
So
I love it.
As you might guess, it was an exciting race and came down to the two of them pushing each other and dropping the field.
Yeah.
And who came out on top? Yet again, it was Kira D'Amato.
Kira D'Amato.
Showing she's got the stuff.
Yeah, she posted on Instagram to run into the weekend like Edna Kiplagat is chasing after you. And she's like, and I mean this with all the respect in the world, but it's terrifying to have Edna chasing you.
Yeah, because she wins lots
she's
and
so
lots of races.
Fast. Yeah, that's
well,
awesome.
And that was good, but it was especially interesting because, as it were, this is now the first time an American has won the Falmouth race.
Congrats,
in 11
Kira D'Amato.
years. In
wow.
11 years.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
On American soil with an American winner.
Yeah, just
cool.
In a world-class field, which is a tough thing to do. Other names, by the way, you might recognize from the women's field included McKenna Morley.
She's been on the show, yep.
And Dakota Lindworm in 13th.
Who's also been on the show rather recently, actually.
Fact.
Yeah. Very exciting. Well, in the men's race, it was a very exciting race as well. Ben Flanagan, we always are talking about him because he races quite often.
He runs the road circuit a lot.
He runs the roads.
He is Canadian. So he's not
Canadian.
So when you hear us talking about the US champs and you never hear his name, well, it's because he's not American. But he's always running the road circuit.
Did I say he was American?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm just saying
like,
because you'll hear his name across many different distances.
Mm-hmm.
He does in fact train in the United States a lot of the time. So he's running the road circuit in the US quite a bit.
Yep. Absolutely. And then behind him was Bias Mbasa of the USA.
And indeed, 7 seconds later.
He's won the 25K championships in Grand Rapids. For those of you who are familiar with that 25K championship, he's been doing well in the road circuit for USA.
Should be noted that was Flanagan's 3rd Falmouth Road Race victory.
Wow.
Yeah, so he's got it on 2018 and then last year as well as this year. So defended his title too, which is exciting stuff. And that also marks, because there's only one missing then from between them. Only one person has won it aside from him in the last 4 years because they skipped a year with Falmouth.
Okay.
So very strong victory, also beating some other world-class runners like Leonard Career and Sam Shalenga of the United States and Kenya's David Bett and Wesley Kiptoo. And so when you can win a race like that, and for Ben Flanagan winning it a few times like that, he's definitely got that distance down.
And Sam Shalenga, we mention him often because he's been on the show and he's very strong, not only on the tracks, but also on the roads. So it's exciting to see. And then Clayton Young, another previous podcast guest of USA, was in 11th place.
Exciting things.
Mm-hmm.
Well, here's one final interesting update for you, and it has to do then with next year's World Championships in Budapest. So,
I mean, we're excited about the championships. Yeah. It's a want because of what he's saying next.
Once again, World Athletics has changed the qualifying standards, which basically they're on a roll here, and this is common. This is, by the way, common that the standards change basically every year. They're always trying to slightly refine them so that the field sizes are contained and that the qualification is challenging enough to get only, you're not getting floods of people qualifying, but not so hard that you don't get enough people. Okay? Well, what they've essentially done is they've thrown out the second half of that and said, we don't care if it's so hard because we have a backup plan, which is the ranking system I'll talk about in a moment. But they've further enhanced the standards to the degree that these times are basically,
they set them on fire.
Like
they're so fast.
Have to be in the world's elite.
Possibly winning.
Like winning races to be able to run these kinds of performances.
If you run the time that they have listed, it could in any year possibly be the winning time.
For example,
that event.
The new men's marathon qualifying time standard is 2:09:40.
Whoa.
How many Americans, Andy, have run 2:09:40 40. Well, actually,
You're putting me on the
it's
spot.
like 12. It's like 12. Okay, not very many ever in the history of the country.
In like the steeplechase, Bernard Keeter posted that he was afraid of this one too because it's
8:15.
8:15, which.
Yep. Which, once again, not very many
not
Americans
very many.
ever have run
Yeah,
that fast.
it is very fast.
Yeah, and so this is always interesting because it's like, all right, well, what are they doing? What are they doing? Well, they're clearly doing two things. First, they're trying to make the time standards the most challenging aspect of the qualification potential. They're doing that on purpose because they're basically trying to say, we'll catch some people who will run the fast times who don't necessarily show up in some other events and championship races, who don't race often enough or don't have opportunity to travel around the world to the big races. We'll still catch some of those with these super fast times, and we know for a fact that they're capable of world-class stuff because they're running world-class times, right? However, we don't want very many people qualifying by times because really what World Athletics wants is they want people qualifying through the ranking system, which means they want
these
them
fast
racing
runners
each other
at races to
Yes.
heighten the experience of sport at these international races.
Which makes sense. You know, we understand the point.
More excitement.
It's also a little
for
bit
the
crazy
sport.
how fast these times are. So here's the way it works. Okay, every field is limited. There's a cap of how many people. They've published it on their website. Like the marathon is 100. The 10,000 is 27. Someone explain to me why it's 27
27 for what?
for the 10,000 meters.
Oh.
Why is it 27? That is such a strange number. Okay, so it's
Probably
27.
a reason, Zach. There's probably a
I
reason.
know there's a reason. I just don't know what it is. And then it's, things like 36 or something for the 5,000. So the point here is they need to fill that many people. No matter what, they're going to have that many in the race. This is the change, right? Why the time standard doesn't matter so much. So the first spots go to anyone who has run the time standards. They're the first people to be entered into the race. So if 100 men in the world, and there's a max 3 from each country, excluding the wild card winner of the previous, like Ethiopia is going to get 4 for the next World Champs. Anyways, so up to 3 from each country to 100 total. If all of those 100 have run 209.40 or faster, then that's it. That's the whole field. Whatever the fastest people are getting in. But that's not going to happen because there's never 100 people from all different countries in the year that run 209.40. So instead, then what happens is, okay, so we fill the field with as many people who'd hit the times, and then the next layer down is they've got like these wild card factors for qualifications, including previous champions in the event. They get an automatic qualifier into the next year's event, including things like, and I don't know which events this applies to, but if you run World Cross Country Championships and finish in the top 8 that year, you get a wild card bid to the World Championships in track, which is new. Well, maybe not new this year, but it's new recently.
Interesting. They
Very
want more
interesting.
people running cross country. That's why.
Well, they do because cross country tends to be quite slim internationally. You have a lot of great
Interesting.
runners who just never do it. So there's that. That's fascinating to me. And then after they've gone through some of these other wild card things, there's a couple of other factors. Then they go to the world ranking list and just grab as many people from the list as they need to fill the field. So we mentioned 100 in the marathon, right? Let's say you've got 25 people who run the times, and you've got, the one wild card from the thing and a couple of other wild cards from another thing. Let's say you've got 70 more runners. They're just going to go to the world ranking list and start marching down the list. The top 70 people
That
who
already don't have people from their country.
don't already
represented.
have your
Yep.
maximum cap from your country, which is 3, go down until they hit 70. And so for the runners who aren't running that crazy time, what they're doing, they're playing the game of what's my ranking and what can I do to improve my ranking all the time. And this is where it gets weird and why I don't like this system, because then what they're starting to say is, okay, so if I run this event, which is a little bit weaker event, but it's in a highly ranked event status, like a world marathon major that's not quite as fast as some of the other ones, I'm going to run that one because I have a better chance of beating people than if I run, say, Berlin, where, Kipchoge and Kenenisa Bekele are battling again for world records. So, like, you get into these situations where people start looking at where should I run and when should I run to try to have my best possible chance at qualifying.
But then you
don't
also
like that
are getting
game.
better. You're getting better competition at more of these world events.
Yeah, but you're putting the stress more on finding the right kinds of opportunities than you are on performing as well as you can when you go.
We wouldn't have to
race.
worry so much about it if there was more money in the sport and there's more sponsorship and people could fly all over the world and race wherever they want to race.
Well, there's a lot interest going on there, and certainly more track and field coming yet this
Yes.
summer before we have to start thinking about next year. Mm-hmm. So that's fun.
Well, we're excited that you joined us today on the A to Z Running podcast. We really do appreciate you putting us in your ears as you're running or going about your day. We want you to thrive, and that's why we're here. So if you haven't yet, please subscribe to the show, share with a friend. We'd love to grow. So we need your help to do that.
And if you need us in more places than your ears, then consider heading to AtoZrunning.com and looking for the word coaching.
Sure.
And find all the various services that we offer. And especially insofar as we offer services that can help you in your training goals.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk to you next week.